The challenge was significant because even though I've been practicing very intensely in the meditation tradition for 11 years and I've done many retreats, a long extended retreat in silence is a new animal. One of the early realizations was a couple months in was like, wow, I'm still beating myself up and a little guilty and shamed, even though nobody's here, not my mother, not my girlfriend, not my teacher, not my friends, not my brothers, and still. And it was this very sort of clarifying experience that I don't think it's the external world as much as I thought it was. Now, the external world is incredible. I'm not discounting the external world. I'm suggesting that it was a revelation at a new level, how much of my sort of misery and shame is self-generated. So that was hard to face as one. The next thing that became what ended up being the greatest challenge was that I started getting depressed. I started slipping into a depression, and I was well trained enough that no matter what, I'd still get up and meditate. And I was meditating at least 8 hours a day, sometimes as long as 10 hours a day. And there was no TV, no radio. All I had to read were I only brought the world's holy scriptures. So I had the Bible, the Quran, the New Testament, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the Book of Mormon. That's all I had with those books.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Shot of Inspiration. I'm Greg Stevens, your host. My Quaker Hanja co-host, sidekick, and man's best friend, Finley, is on sabbatical today. She needed some socializing time with her canine friends and is enjoying doggy daycare as I'm in the office today, but she'll return on our next episode. But today's guest, I'm really excited to have. I met Eric Kaufmann several weeks ago on a Zoom call through an introduction through Jennifer Hill. You might have heard me mention her a couple of times. And Eric is the founder and CEO of Sagatica, a distinguished executive development consultancy. He's worked with Fortune 100 leaders for more than 2 decades. And I want you to hear just a few of his experiences and accomplishments, and these are in no particular order. First, he's a master scuba instructor and hypnotherapist. He's the author of 3 different books: Leadership is a Hero's Journey, The 4 Virtues of a Leader, Navigating the Hero Journey Through Risk to Results. And then the third one is Leadership Breakdown, How Conscious Leaders Generate Breakthroughs That Enrich Business and the World. He also grew up in Israel and lived in South Africa. He spent a year meditating in an isolated cabin he built in the mountains of New Mexico. He has a degree in both business and psychology. He's been practicing Zen for more than 40 years now. He's a thought leader at Harvard's Institute of Coaching. He's also a TEDx speaker. And his last book, he created a blueprint to conscious leadership, which I really want to dive into and talk about throughout our interview today. Also, he is the chairman of the board for Dr. Bronner's. And these are just a few of his experiences. He also has 2 amazing daughters and an amazing wife as well. One of his daughters lives in Lisbon, Portugal, and the other is attending Berkeley in California. And Eric, thank you so much for being here. I'm really happy to have you here today.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Thank you. I'm looking forward to time with you.
Yeah.
Whether it's recorded or not, time with you has proven to be quite delightful.
Thanks. No, it's when you find a kindred spirit and someone who, as we talked, I felt my cup was filled after talking to you last time. And when you talk to someone and you just feel like the conversation stays with you for a couple of days. And I want to give that to our audience. And so I know you're passionate. We've got a lot of things we can talk about. Let's talk about conscious leadership and the difference between doing the type of work you do in organizations and also the connection with spirit that you have, because I really see you living what you teach. It shows in who you are. It shows in our conversations. Tell the audience what conscious leadership to be and talk a little about your blueprint that you created.
All right. So it's 2025 or so, right? In 1999. So this is a minute ago, right? I was able to get on the docket at the American Society of Training and Development annual conference in Dallas, Texas. It was a massive conference. I had an opportunity to present in a breakout room for 150 people or so. And my topic in 1999 was spirituality in business.
Wow.
This is 25 years ago. And I was so lit up and passionate about it. And I had some really good ideas. And I had black hair, the whole thing going on, and a certain level of naivete. I made a great presentation. It was really great. People loved it, but not one person or company even considered hiring me or bringing me in to do anything, because they all came up to me and said, look, man, I love it. Love it. Love what you're saying. My company would never go for this. This is way out there. So that was 25 years ago. And I've been bullheadedly insisting that this is something that's worth doing and important, and not in opposition to or in conflict with anything that we do in the sort of ordinary conduct of business. This is a dimension of experience and existence and relationship and conduct and way of being that is essential. And so for 25 years, I've been doing this, and I've had many wonderful opportunities to really get people invested and to grow and to see the connection. The space is very different now. How many wonderful people are out there promoting this way of being that is more conscious, more intentional, more perceptive, less self-centered. And I've been attempting to make this more and more accessible. And in my most recent book, Leadership Breakdown, it's the most accessible that I've been able to do over 3 books. The first thing I want to say, I've come to make a distinction between what I call conscientious business or conscientious leadership and conscious leadership. And it's a distinction that matters to me and might be new to other people, but conscientious leadership is you do the right thing, right? It's the thing to do from conscience. You're being conscientious. So you put solar panels on the roof, you make sure that you pay your employees a fair wage, you deal with your supply chain in such a way that you're not screwing them or abusing the sort of the developing countries from which you're getting your supplies. Those are beautiful things to do, necessary things to do if you're inclined that way. And they're necessary things to do because they sustain the general ecosystem. They're not just morally good, but they're conscientious. You do the right thing. Conscious leadership can do all these things, but requires that our level of consciousness actually expands. You can do all kinds of conscientious things and not required to personally evolve as a human being. Conscious leadership requires that you actually evolve as a man, as a woman, as a person, and grow in maturity. So let me pause there because it's an important distinction. It's not academic. I just want to make sure it's clear, right?
I see, if you want to put it simple, you might not agree with this, but I think it's thinking of knowledge compared to wisdom. You have knowledge, you need to do these things. The wisdom is beyond knowledge. It's experience. It's like you said, it's that evolution. And I'd rather be around someone with wisdom than just knowledge.
I think that's a great analog, right? Where they are in the same field, but they actually represent different things. And so for me, the work of conscious leadership is really the work around the premise, to even go a step, not backwards, but to the side for context, is that in the course of our human history, since the pre-industrial revolution, the world order was a little more fixed. You had the king, or the queen, but mostly kings, right? And then you had the priest. And between the king and the priest who duped it out for power, those were the 2 centers of power. And that's how the world jammed. And then you had people with means who were related to the royal family. And then you had the serfs who worked the field.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
There was another distinction, but the Industrial Revolution really turns it pretty significantly, because with the Industrial Revolution, we start having, first of all, movement out of the fields and into the cities. We start having mechanism, mass. We create a middle class who can now get wealthy on their labor in a way that's not just related to the weather, like the farmer. We start having a class of actual power brokers called industrialists.
Mm-hmm.
We had merchants before, but the merchants were beholden to the king or the priest. So now we have industrialists. So the Industrial Revolution doesn't just change mechanism, it changes society.
Right.
So now fast forward 250 years, the kings have descended significantly, and the forms of government that have come have peaked and now seem to be receding. And the churches and organized religions have lost much of their sway and power over time. So who's really standing at the top of the ladder that is shaping not only human society, but the physical planet? It's business leaders.
Right.
Look at America right now. There's a business leader who's running the whole show. And And there's business leaders all around him who are supporting him with their money and their reach and their technology. So it's a significant moment because the architects of humanity, what we think is fashionable, what we think is right, what we think is moral, is architected by the powers that be, and these powers that be are commercial. And
Yeah.
so
I've said that for years that in essence, they're modern day kings and queens, just like you're talking about. It's been the shift. They have the power and it's a whole different level of understanding. And then there's all kinds of opportunities and drawbacks by that.
and so to me, the urgency of this notion of conscious leadership, not just conscientious, do the right thing, but raise the frequency, expand the level of consciousness, actually be a more mature human,
Yeah.
is that these governors, these architects of humanity and of the planet, if we don't have a scale level shift in the way they perceive and understand not only themselves, but the world and their relationship to the world, then we will be forever pawns in their commercial interest.
Yeah.
But they are now the rulers, as
Right.
it were, drivers, the architects. And so they can no longer hide behind the simplicity of being commercial drivers when they are now the social architects.
Right. Well,
And so that's my urgency for this whole conscious leadership, not just solar panels and supply chain fairness, but actually a deeper, more profound way of being mature humans.
the way you describe that, I'd never thought of it like this. Also, you consider the businessman, their focus has typically been products, okay, not people. And a king and a queen would actually understood they had subjects to take care of. And so again, that conscious view needs to be there because there has been a shift. And if that responsibility is there and you don't look at that, there's going to be a lot of different problems that have to be solved as we don't do that, if we don't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I saw, we were looking at some financial records from a rather large company, and they were, how were they calling it? They were assigning all people as costs, cost centers, which is even more directly operational than human resources, which still at least has the word human in it. And you're right. So my work around conscious leadership is not in any way, shape, or form intended in any way at all to limit the capacity, the success, the growth, the scale, the impact of business.
Right.
My thread is that do all that.
Mhm.
Yeah, do it.
Right.
Kick ass. Be successful. Be amazing. But also know that you're an architect and a steward. As an architect and steward, there's a level of consciousness, which means what we can talk about what consciousness is, but to raise our level of consciousness means fundamentally, if nothing else, that we're not just entirely stuck in our own small version of ourself. Because what happens as we mature, as consciousness grows, our sense of self actually expands to include my kids, my wife, my dog, my parents, my loved ones. Oh, also my cousins. What about the people in the city, the people in my neighborhood? And so when it grows in the people in this country, in the planet, growing in consciousness has a direct correlation to the sense of inclusion of all people. It doesn't mean that everything goes and everyone can behave in ways whatever they want. I'm very familiar with the Berkeley version of inclusion and belonging, and I think they've gone so far to the other side that it basically says, do whatever the hell you want. I'm not saying that. I am saying that we are inherently all interconnected. And every spiritual tradition, when you strip it right down, recognizes two things. One, that the God force is a unifying force and means everything is interconnected. And the other is that we, the individual, are not nearly significant as the total.
Yep.
And so if we can understand the interconnectedness and interdependence and the sense of measure of our actual importance in the world and put those two things in perspective, consciousness is growing.
I love that. I love that. Let me ask you, when I was talking about some of the things you've done, I've known a couple of people who've done extended silent retreats, gotten away, even lived off the grid for a while to just really meditate, focus, understand themselves, understand the world they live in, understand humans, the human condition. I'm sure you went through all of that when you went and spent time in New Mexico, it sounds like. Tell us what occurred for you there because to me when I hear what you're saying, it's a depth of thinking that I think you can only get when you get away, when you actually do that, because we're so distracted with so many things, especially today, technology, things are just moving so fast. And I think One of the books I wanted to write was Distractions. We're just distracted with everything. What did that provide for you? And what kind of challenges did that seclusion give you? What challenges and what breakthroughs did it give you?
I love the question, Greg, because you're assuming that there were challenges. That's a totally fair assumption. Yeah, that's a great question. Context-wise, when I built a cabin in New Mexico, that was 11 years. So the prior 11 years, I'd been living in a spiritual commune. So I moved in and then lived with a teacher in the commune, ashram, if you will. I was living in a commune. I was young. I was a graduate of college. I went to work at corporate. I worked at 3M. I worked at Corning with some big brand names. And I came to a fork in the road, right? Because I was now in my early 30s, 30, 31, 32. The GM at the division of Corning that I was working in was completely setting me up to go down the GM CEO track. And the teacher in the order was completely setting me up to go in the teaching track and the spiritual community. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a lot. These are very different life paths. And anyway, long story short, I decided to go the spiritual path and abandon the whole business path. And so I actually quit my job, gave away all my money, shaved my head, got rid of my childhood photos. I was done with the world and I was going to go all in. And to go all in, I would start with this long retreat, which, by the way, up until that point, I'd already done. We were doing 3 retreats a year. So whatever that is over, I'd done 30 some odd retreats already, but these were like mostly 5 and 10 day retreats. I just want to give some context. I didn't just drop off into a retreat out of nowhere. This was going to be.
Usually grow into that because most of
Yeah, I recommend that.
yeah, I've done some silent retreats and I'm actually going to go on one in the next couple of months. And I know that I had to grow into each one before I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to your question about challenges and what you say, gains or gifts or something to that effect, I think the challenge was significant because even though I've been practicing very intensely in the meditation tradition for 11 years and I've done many retreats, a long extended retreat in silence is a new animal. One of the early realizations was a couple months in was like, wow, I'm still beating myself up and a little guilty and shamed, even though nobody's here, not my mother, not my girlfriend, not my teacher, not my friends, not my brothers, and still. And it was this very sort of clarifying experience that I don't think it's the external world as much as I thought it was. Now, the external world is incredible. I'm not discounting the external world. I'm suggesting that it was a revelation at a new level, how much of my sort of misery and shame is self-generated. So that was hard to face. The next thing that became what ended up being the greatest challenge was that I started getting depressed. I started slipping into a depression and I was well trained enough that no matter what, I'd still get up and meditate. And I was meditating at least 8 hours a day, sometimes as long as 10 hours a day. And there was no TV, no radio. All I had to read were like, I only brought the world's holy scriptures. So I had the Bible, the Quran, the New Testament, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the Book of Mormon. That's all I had with those books. And I started getting bombed and depressed, and that sense of, oh my God, I'm the source of this. I don't know if you have an inner critic sometimes that chirps away. It started chirping away without any mitigating forces. So now I'm sitting and meditating, doing my best to just follow my breath and be one with the die. And this inner critic is like, chirp, you suck. You're never going to get this. This is too hard for you. What have you done? You threw away a career. How are you ever going? What's life going to be? What's a spiritual community? That's bullshit anyway. It just got really compelling.
Got
And
loud.
wow, with no mitigating force, nothing to distract to the point of distraction, just me and this wonderful cacophony of critic. And then the critic started like really building up steam and started going from critic to taunter and from taunter to annihilator. And I started having these really dark thoughts, right? And I don't talk about something, but you asked. And at one point, as this arc moved, I started realizing that I'm not a good person and that I am a leech and a burden to society for lack of being essentially perfect. Because my inner critic was saying perfect is the standard, less than perfect, and I'm really less than perfect. I have a journal entry about realizing that an earthworm had more value than I did because an earthworm aerated the soil and made it possible for plants to grow, and I did nothing of value. feeling depressed right now saying it. But it was very heavy. And then that started to go towards an actual suicidal trend. And over a couple of months, it got really significant. And I have nobody to process this with. And I'm choosing to keep showing up on a cushion and get abused. Eventually, it became very clear that I really should kill myself, which was a difficult thing to grapple with. And it got even weirder and worse when I eventually concluded that I could do one thing that would immediately improve the planet. And it was a sense of relief. There is something I could do to, in fact, make the world a better place. I could kill myself because then the world will become better. And I have to tell you that sitting with that realization was really hard because I actually had a sense of relief. I could do something useful. And not going there took a lot of breathing and discipline. And that was by far the greatest challenge, if you're asking what the challenges were, right? Was to come that close to conclude that I am not worthy of being alive and that I could finally do something meaningful by ending my life. It's heavy, my friend. I know that.
No,
But
I love this because I think that's what we're here to talk about. I knew you could go deep and I wanted to because I truly believe there are people listening that had all kinds of different challenges, not the same one you did, but their own. And they're connecting with this right now because I went through and I almost went that route myself at one point in my life. And the thing that brought me through, and I'm going to ask what brought you through that. Thing that brought me through was there was one relationship, my best friend, and he had lost his father to suicide, and he had just found out 2 weeks before. And because his father had committed suicide when he was 6 years old, he thought he just died, and it was really working on him. And that one relationship was the one relationship I had. I thought, I cannot let him down. And what I realized was his father taking his life saved mine. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I haven't talked about it much to many people, but it's one of those things that, wow, there's something in that when you get to that. What got you on the other side? What was the process for you?
what got me through was first, I was really well trained in meditating. Whatever that means, we can revisit that or not. But essentially, well trained means the essence of the, at least in the Zen tradition, the essence of the practice, if we strip away all the sort of techniques and stuff, is to just be present to reality as it is and to allow reality to continue to flow to become, there's a Dogen Zenji, one of the great ancestors in the Zen, would say the vast sky does not impede the movement of the drifting cloud.
Yeah.
And so to arrive at a point where I can be the vast sky and the clouds are all the contents of consciousness, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And so I was really well trained to embody the vast sky and let the clouds pass by. Now, these clouds were thick. And what eventually I started to be able to do through that sitting is to distinguish the sound of that inner critic. So if you talk about relationship with an external person who's brought value by saying, I'm here for you and you're here for me, it was still relational, but it wasn't a person. It was the relationship with that inner dynamic of the inner critic. And I didn't fight the inner critic and I didn't destroy the inner critic. I couldn't. But I actually got to the point where I could sit. The inner critic could be right in my face and I could just see it for what it is, which ultimately was this desperate need to be successful that was really implanted by my parents with the best of intent. The inner critic was this externalized force that became internal, that was there to beat me so that I would rise to the challenge and be successful. And so the intention was right, the execution was horrible. And I just basically got so at ease with being with that inner critic. That inner critic stopped because it recognized that it is not only her, but I've got this. That to me was the big change and one of the most significant shifts in my existence, right? The inner critic exists because we're scared. It is here to provide us the energy, the motivation, the drive, the determination, the push, so that we can go on with life. Life is scary. And when I sat there and I eventually cultivated this sense of trust that I can make a choice in this most insane condition and that I will stick to my choice, the level of trust that sort of flourished began to settle the inner critic and soothe its own need because it says, you know what? You take the keys and drive. I don't need to be here. I hope this makes sense, right?
Absolutely. To me, it does.
And then at one point, I realized there was no more inner critic. There was no noise. It was just the vast sky and the drifting clouds. And I was freed from that. And I should tell you that in the ensuing 27 years or so, I have not heard the inner critic again.
Gosh, I'd love to get there.
I don't know how to design that, and I wouldn't recommend my path to
Yeah,
anyone,
absolutely.
but the relationship became such that it really said, you've got this.
Yeah.
And it switched off and has, I don't know that it won't come back. I don't know how these things work,
Yeah.
but I don't have an inner critical voice anymore in almost 30 years. I have doubt, I have fear, I have insecurity, I have embarrassment, but I don't have an inner critic. If you ask me about a gift, it was a hard way to come by it, but that has made life simpler
Yeah.
to not have it.
Let me ask you, because of that, have you experienced deeper love for yourself?
That is such a gorgeous question. That is such a gorgeous question because yes,
Good. Yeah.
and
And
over the last few years in particular, maybe just in the last 5 or 6 years, if I'm thinking about just 2020-ish. So I lived in the spiritual community. I came in as a 19-year-old. I was a young punk, right? Way out of my league with all the old people in their 30s there. And so so when I was young, this is true. It sounds silly when I say it out loud, but in my young 19, 20-year-old version of me, I expected that enlightenment would mean that there's so much light actually coming through my world that I could beam light through my eyes and I could see in the dark. And so that was, for all I know, that might still be true. It just doesn't seem right. But I had a very sort of romantic view of enlightenment, and it only got exacerbated with reading the books about the masters and the gurus and the Buddhas and all that. And I'm like, it's not looking like it's happening for me in that way in this lifetime. But a few years ago, I realized that there's what I come to call a householder enlightenment level, because I am a householder, right? And there's a householder enlightenment. And that householder enlightenment, in the sort of plainest English I could say, I would call self-acceptance. And the move then between self-acceptance and self-love is very fluid, right? But when the inner critic chilled, a couple of things happened. It started something very different. I ended up obviously not going into the order as a teacher, but leaving the order. Meditation is my medicine still, but I had this revelation that it's not just the head and wisdom that gets to be cultivated with these meditative practice. It's the heart and love, and it's the body and presence, and what came of that was, where would I be able to practice more intensely this love for self and love for others than with wife and children and in service and community? And so yes, the love, what I call the self-acceptance, that self-acceptance, we can achieve that in this lifetime. We can actually in this lifetime get to the point where we find ourselves utterly just right. I think the mistake is that so many people want to be special and the best and the biggest and famous and powerful and rich. Good luck to everyone. That's beautiful stuff. Really, the trick, as far as I'm concerned, is to arrive at a place where I understand that I am just right.
And I believe that came from your experience. I truly believe when you said you left the group and you found your own path, and I don't think that could have been had you not dealt with that inner critic, that you could open that self to find your own path that way. What would you just say to someone who's listening right now who this resonates for them? They would like to find something for themselves. And where would you tell them to look?
I think there are many paths. There are many paths, and there are different styles of going about it, right? So it's difficult to say. For me, it's been 40 years of Zen practice with other sort of practices and so forth, but it doesn't matter what it was for me. It matters to me what I hold to be reliable. I don't know if it's true, but it's reliable, is that there is a contemplative component to this. And by contemplative, I don't just mean reading the scriptures and thinking about God, but this capacity to turn the lens inward. And so that's one. The other thing that is highly reliable is that the cultivation of stillness is of paramount importance. However you go about cultivating stillness, the cultivation of stillness, classically, that's meditation techniques, right? But I don't want to go to meditation and get wrapped up in a methodology. I want to go to the essence. And the essence is that your book about distraction, by the way, is hopefully still in the works, right? Because it's not like we're any less distracted these days. Right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
we're being professionally distracted,
Right.
commercially distracted, right?
Yeah.
But this capacity for stillness, look, and I'll say this with some conviction, I don't see how you can write a self-acceptance without stillness. Because self-acceptance, if you strip away all the psychological part of it, at some point is you just have to land back here. You just have to land fully in the self. And if you're in constant motion, you can't find the self to land in. So there's got to be some kind of a settling, and that requires a stillness. So some kind of reflection where I have a better understanding. So I have to know myself. And then the stillness so that I can cultivate the capacity to trust myself. And then when I know myself and I trust myself, to your point, I begin to love myself. So as I know myself, I trust myself, I love myself, both as a cycle and a sequence. And if we don't get still, we can't find it. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll pause, is that I don't see how it can be done casually.
Intentionally.
Right? It has to be intentional. And the folks who accomplish this kind of experience are usually doing something in the form of devotion. And devotion doesn't mean necessarily that I give myself over to God or to the church or to the community or to the ashram. Devotion means that I stick with it over time, whether or not I feel like it in the moment. And I think we have a society that is very moved by whatever moves them. So we have a society of amoebas that are pushed by the external forces. But if we want to really grow these giant sequoia trees, we're going to have to plant ourselves and grow tall, which is to say, we're going to have to stand our ground and be devoted.
I love your answer because thinking through all of what you've said, I agree. I think that silence, that listening, because there's an intention in your listening when you're on your own. And you worked on it with meditation. Many people find different ways, but I agree with you. There's no way to do it with all the distractions. You gotta have to get away and focus on that. But I believe that's what's so beautiful, because I believe different people, the right thing will show up when you do that. I do believe that intentionality is honored, whatever that form is for you, it begins to show up. And I love that you're so laser on it, because I've learned so much by just talking to you about this today. I had no idea we were going to go here. And I love it because I think it's a deeper conversation. And I think that's what the world needs right now. They need to get silent. And we need to get in a place where we understand who we are, accept who we are, and then go and give from a place of, I think that's when we're our best, when we can become our best. Like you were talking about, you were being pushed by forces from your good intentioned family that were pushing you in a way that really wasn't you. It was a programming you had. And you have to give up that programming to find yourself. And we're so programmed in our world today, from just society, religion, everything else. I talk to people consistently where, why do you believe that? Well, my parents told me this, or this. Have you ever thought for yourself? Have you ever really gotten there? And it's a frightening thing for a lot of people, for most people, I'd say.
I would, and myself included.
Yeah, me too.
It's not like
Getting away and going on another silent retreat. At first, it sounds, I don't know that I want to do that again, but there's something in me that's pulling me to. I'm just setting it up right now, and I hadn't told anyone about it. So
until now, yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. There's I heard this somewhere. I can't remember who shared this with me. So thank you to them, and I can't remember who it was, but this was years ago, and they were saying our programming, to your point, There are the 4 points of programming: mother, father, church, state. Mother, father, church, and state. And I think one of the great opportunities for our journey as a human being in this one relatively brief lifetime is, do we want to go down this path where it's mother, father, church, and state, and we just basically put a version of the theme, right? That we just have our own little twist on that basic conditioning. Or do we want to find the script and code and honor what was wired into it before it got coded in a hard way by our experiences in our family and the church and the state? And so now that I said it, I'm just basically thinking of the Matrix, I guess. We're just talking about that. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so original. There's a movie about that. There are many movies about that. But that was the nature of my book, Leadership as a Hero's Journey, because that was the premise. So to bring this back to this notion of conscious leadership, because we just went deep on the very individual level. But okay, now you show up as a leader who's still, a leader who's contemplative, a leader who understands their place in the world and is neither better than anyone else nor worse than anyone else, just right, and has the sense of, I know myself, I trust myself, I love myself. From that fertile ground, what comes, right? I want to know other people. I want to trust other people. I want to love other people. And it becomes not only functional in so much as that, now think of yourself as a person who's employed by a leader, a manager who actually leans in and listens, right? Who actually has enough of a capacity to work the shutters of their heart to open up at the right time to allow their humanity to shine upon you when necessary. They can close those shutters back down. We don't have to be vulnerable all day long. That's exhausting.
Right.
But having those shutters on a pulley system where I can deliberately open it as necessary as a leader, people just lean into that like crazy. People stick around leaders like that and do things that are way beyond what they're paid to do because they feel like human beings. And so the impact to the business is direct. The impact to the individual human is direct. The positive, right? The positive impact to their family is direct, because when I'm going to work and I feel I can be stressed and tense and drive like mad to try and accomplish this goal and that project, but I'm also still being treated in a way that makes me feel like a intact human. I go back and I don't kick the dog and scream at my kids. I pet the dog and I feed my kids with my love and tender kind of awareness, right? So I'm not being Pollyannic, man. This is measurably good for the leader, for the people on their team, for the community within which they exist, and for the services and products they sell.
Yeah. I see exactly what you're saying, but I'm going to just add on to that is I think in the next 20, 30 years, that's the type of leaders that are going to be the leaders. There's going to be a washout somewhere, because what we're following now is titles. We're not following leaders. I do believe there's leaders out there going to do this, and they're going to emerge as real leaders because people will follow that. I think people are hungry for that. I think they're starving for that as we do that. And I believe it will come through a conscious spiritual type of leadership, whatever you think that may be. I don't think it has a form as much as it will, this person is living what we want to live by. And there's a congruency between their leadership and their life, and it's above board, and it's something that people will gravitate to naturally. I believe it will happen, and there's going to be adjustments made in other ways, I think, as well.
Your prediction is consistent with some of the research from the big sort of research organizations that are looking into the future of leadership. So I don't know if you poked around or read about it, but because I'm in a executive development world, the McKinseys of the world and the Bains and the folks who are researching where the trends are going for leadership and executive leadership in particular are completely aligned with what you're saying, right? And so enter AI, right? The trend has been going for a while. AI is like this unbelievable tool, amazing tool. It's got its remarkable things. There's some scary things about it. We're not here to talk about that in a big way. What it will do, though, is it will, and it already is, right? It is extracting out of the leadership work, as it is extracting out of the sort of operational work, many of the things that can be automated or at least predictable.
Right.
And so the leadership work, the management work is now becoming easily more. The aphorism in management for a long time is you can't manage what you can't measure.
Right.
So now if you can measure that, put it into a system that has a pattern recognition that exceeds any one human being by 10,000 fold. And if you manage what you measure, now you measure properly and manage properly, a lot of the management role is taken care of, right? So now what? It's going to be things like creativity And it's going to be things like empathy, and it's going to be things like collaboration, which will require more of these sort of skills, the more mature, the more sophisticated expressions of our consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to
And
knowledge and wisdom, the difference.
knowledge and
Again,
wisdom.
right
Yeah.
back, right back there. Go ahead.
Oh, you had asked me earlier about the blueprint or something like that, and I realized that
Yeah,
I
please.
didn't really answer that. I'll answer in a short way, not to belabor the point, but it is germane to what we're talking about because you asked me, like, how would you develop it, right? So there's the answer that says, find your way. And then there's the answer that says, I've also got a way. I've been at this for over 40 years and I'm still a teacher, as are you. So we get a kick out of it. We're having this conversation so we can share stuff with people. But you mentioned the conditioning as the issue. And I think one of the more common terms for that, what happens to that pattern of conditioning is who we become in that pattern. And one way in psychology, they talk about that pattern is they call it the ego. So an ego is a pattern of familiar and predictable assumptions and expectations and beliefs that form the way we conduct ourselves, what we believe, and how we engage with other people, and the choices we make in the world. Right? That's fairly fair. And essentially, what I've come up with is that the number one barrier to executive effectiveness, so now we're back at the sort of how do executives be effective, is what I've come to call egomyopia. Egomyopia. Not being able to see and regulate their ego in real time. They're blinded by their ego. And that the work of conscious leadership, then, if we want to be more of a conscious leader, is we have to correct that egomyopia. I'm not interested in killing the ego. And at another time, I can tell you the ways I've tried to do that doesn't work for me. There's all kinds of things I've done to see if I can actually kill the ego. Not successful.
Right.
No longer an effort. The ego is a structure. We need the structure.
Right.
When it's very myopic and narrow, that structure is both predictable and inefficient. Right. So we have to correct the ego myopia. If I have myopia in my eyes, I can get A or B, 1 or 2. Which one's better? I have glasses and now I see clearly.
Yep.
So we can correct the ego myopia. And the short of it is that there are 3 primary colors of ego myopia, the 3 primary sort of needs that the ego has that we're driven by. And we make up our own versions of it, right? But there's the need to be right. You have to see me as smart, as competent, knowledgeable, right? There's a need to be liked. I want to be loved and belonged and seen as part of the in-group. And there's a need to have might. I want control and authority and power and the ability to make my own decisions, right? When our kids were 2 and 3 and 4 years old, we saw that play out in Technicolor. It was amazing. And that's how we go about life, with the need to be right, the need to be liked, the need to have might. And you see the boss over here. Okay, so now we're in the meeting and I just said, I have a new idea. But Gerald over there jumped all over because he has a need to be right. He wants to make sure that nobody thinks I'm smarter than him. And so he's shitting all over my idea just so he can feel good about it. Not because he even doesn't like me. He's just, you follow where I'm going, right?
Just needs.
Or Tom over here, who is the CEO, but his need to be liked is so pervasive that he's absolutely not giving feedback in a way that's meaningful to people because he doesn't want them to be upset with him and therefore maybe reject him. And so he's got this ineffective series of conversations going on because people are doing things ineffectively and he won't say anything. And I can go on, right? And so on. And so how do we correct that? This is what my sort of work and program and mechanism is all about. We cultivate these 3 dimensions of conscious leadership, which would be really the maturation of these 3 needs, right? So the need to be right with the right kind of practices and methodology develops into, to your point, wisdom. If I'm in the need to be right, I'm going to be in denial or I'm going to be opinionated. Wisdom is really aware and curious. It doesn't mean you know everything. It means you're penetrating into what's possible, what's real. The need to be liked, which is all about I-ness of me, right? Like me, can mature as we become love. The ability to actually nurture other people, still have love for myself, but love for others. And the need to have might, which is I need to be in control, actually matures into innate power. And in power, I live with purpose and relaxed presence because I'm in my sense of trust myself. So wisdom, love, and power to me is like the trifecta of what we cultivate to have these conscious leaders. And now imagine what it's like to work with somebody who's at least efforting to bring forth their wisdom, their love, and their power in different ways. And so that's the short form of how my work and my company and my team goes forth and cultivates these conscious leaders.
I love that. I definitely will be referring you to some of the organizations I work with for sure. I just also want our listeners to hear Eric was talking about the need to be like, the need to have might. Think about this, folks. A need is much more deeper than a want. We typically say, oh, this person wants this. That need is there, and we will do anything to get those things handled. You're spot on with those needs that people have, but they're blind spots for us. We don't see it. You can't read the label from inside the jar. That's why it helps to have a coach or a mentor that's going to help shine light on those things you haven't seen. And Eric, I love the work you're doing. I love the depth of conversation we've had. I want to definitely have you back on. And I want to go talk about some other things as well next time. We're going to have all your information on social media. But for those just listening right now, what's the best way to get a hold of you? I know you work with leaders. Is there a kind of a sweet spot for you? Share with us the clientele you're looking for specifically.
The folks that I work with are primarily C-suite. We tend to come in and work with the executive team. I do a lot of one-off work with the CEO or the CFO, the COO. The deeper sort of reality is that I'm a wonderful coach. I've trained in this and done this, and I have all these people that I work with. I cannot beat the system. And so the work we do now is, for the most part, we have one-on-one coaching with the execs, but we also work with the whole team because that is the system, the executive team, right? And then fairly often we'll work with them for a year or so, and then they'll want us, okay, so let's expose the next layer and the next layer. I have no appetite for coming in and doing a program for these high potential leaders, not because I don't love them or think they're amazing, but I think they're only going to rise as high as the executive team will permit. And if we want to have a genuine movement, if the organization is going to move faster, people are going to have more innovation, more autonomy, for the love of God, accountability or empowerment, right? It has to be in a permission field that is set by the executive team. So our sweet spot as a firm is with the executive team of an established organization that's growing. A startup has got so many dogs biting at their heels, they don't have the attention to say, oh yeah, let's talk about this. They're like, dude, I need $1 million by Wednesday or this thing shuts down.
Right.
And if it's a turnaround, they've got dogs pulling at their shirts, tearing them apart, right? So they got no appetite for that. Established organizations that are growing, some inflection point, maybe it's a new CEO, maybe it's a new strategy, maybe the market has changed, maybe they've really scaled. Now they can't handle the complexity of that new space, but I hope that answers the question, right?
Yeah, it does. So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
My website is Sagatica, Sagatica, Sagatica.com. Eric, ERSC at Sagatica.com is my email, or LinkedIn, Eric Kaufmann on LinkedIn. I'm on there at least once a week, so that's active for me.
That's great. And I know you'd be a great public speaker for anyone looking for a keynote as well.
I love doing keynotes. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. That's like a beautiful teaching moment, right? Because we get an hour to just teach, but I can't just preach at them. I want them to learn. If I want them to learn, I want them to really take it on and be compelled. So it's a fun exchange.
Yeah, I love that. And folks, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. I really did. If you would like or subscribe or share it with a friend, please. It helps us expand a positive message to those who listen and hear it and learn it and take it on. And I'm Greg Stevens, and next time my Quaker Hanja Finley will be with us. But as always, folks, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth. Eric, thank you so much for being a guest and sharing with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.